Yeah, so sorry. Patron purge scale ebook activation. There was an interesting question from Pierce just yesterday about notices for cancellation of work orders, and that was something that was introduced in the Alma June release. So that's a fairly new feature that we can talk about. But I know the patron purge question was kind of a Spokane discussion. Ebooks is kind of everybody. I don't know if any of those three discussions are of interest to anyone on the call. Or do you guys want to talk about something else? No, no comments at all, no thoughts? Yeah, Kim says patron purge, so yeah, we can talk about that. And this topic is of interest to people. Yeah, basically to everyone. It's the transition to CTC Link is a good opportunity to reconsider how you manage patron records in Alma currently. That is, how long you keep them. And also the decision points are how long to keep them and how long to keep them if relative to how much the patron might or might not owe the library. So let me get logged into a sandbox and we can take a look. And also a related consideration in this conversation is setting the purge date in your patron load to align with what you would like to do as far as the scheduling of or how often you want to purge patrons. So I'm logging into Sandbox and I'll share my screen in a sec here. This is the one I'm on. There, I think that one. Yeah. All right, are you guys seeing Alma now? Make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Yes, no?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. So, patron purge is considerations here: purge date of patron. The general, patron life cycle by library policy. That is, how long do you want to keep records in Alma? And then there is the issue of dollar amount for forgiveness of fines. And I don't think any of these are really new concepts, but again, it's the move to CTC Link is a good opportunity to clean out the user record cruft in your Alma instance, and also to consider how you are actually doing this now, and whether you want to change the kind of the decision points around how you're doing this. So the first the first thing to note is the purge date set in the patron record. Now the purge date, and I'm just in my record in one of the sandboxes, and the purge date is the first date. It basically sets a time, a point in time beyond which you can purge the patron. So, and the purge date for all of your external users, the users coming from the campus registrar, HR systems, are set by the extract process. So you can decide what this purge date is, configure it in your SMS and PPMS, or if you're already on CTC Link, you can ask your IT folks to update the extract script to change this purge date if you want. If I set this date, for example, to let's say August 16th, 2022, which is about a year from now, that means that unless I change this purge date, Alma won't allow me to purge or delete this patron before that date through the Alma purge job, which we'll look at in a second. So, and so that's, if this date is important because it's going to, you want to align how you're setting the purge date with how often you want to purge patrons from Alma. So if you want to purge patrons every 6 months, you don't want to set the purge date any further in the future than 6 months. If you want to delete patrons after every quarter, then you would have to set this date no more than 3 months out. And it, and the the way the SMS and PPMS scripts have been written, this is a fixed date. So you give it a particular month, day, year, rather than say set it 3 months into the future. With the transition to CTC Link and the reimplementation of the patron extract stuff at each institution, then you have the opportunity to most of the scripts going around that are being shared by the institutions for that process set the purge date based on a rolling calendar. So you can set that purge date to say 3 months from the date the record is loaded. So it will each time the patron is loaded, that date will get updated. So it'll just keep getting pushed farther and farther into the future. But the basic thing to know about the purge date is you can't run the Alma patron purge job and purge patrons until where this date is in the future. So I'm going to pause there and see what clarification or discussion around that we might need to do. And where did my Zoom go? Why do I keep losing? I'm sorry, I lost my Zoom toolbar, so I'm. Oh, here it is. Yeah, it doesn't. I'm not hearing anything. I'm not seeing anything in chat, so I'll assume that purge date makes sense. The way you trigger a removal of patron records is through the purge user records job, and that can be found just under the admin menu, purge user records, and it's a job that you manually run. So there's no, the purge date itself is not going to have any action or do anything, and it's only relevant when you run this job, and this job is not a scheduled job, it's something you run manually. So that regardless of what that purge date is, patrons will never be removed from Alma unless you run this job. And there are just a few settings in this job that you need to think about. The first is number of days after purge date. So if you set the, let's say you want to clean out patron records every 6 months, and you want to, or let me say that another way, you want to purge patrons, all patrons at 6 months after their purge date, then you would just set the number of days after purge date to 180. And that would mean that if I ran this job, it would remove all patrons whose purge date, which we just saw in my record, in an example record, if that date is further in the past than 180 days, then that patron would get removed. Record type, you can leave it at all. I would generally recommend setting it to public, because I know that all of when I talk about this job, I'm really just talking about deleting external users. You've got community users and internal users that you might create for ILL partners or for staff, et cetera. And those are different kinds of records, and they might have special consideration around being removed, especially accounts related to ILL partners. And I know for certain that all users coming in from the load jobs are of a public type, but I don't know how you manage your internal records. And we can, the user record type is just, I'll just pop back. I'll just take a quick, let's do this. And it's not something that comes up often, but when you add a new user, if you add an internal user, you can add them as a contact, a staff, or a public. Contact is generally used for vendor records, where you just want to kind of keep, it's using Alma as an address book sort of for your vendor contacts. That's generally why you would use contact when you add a user. Adding a staff user is something that I've seen some of you do. There's really no functional or technical difference between these users. It's just a way of organizing the users on different tabs. And most typically, all of your users will be added as, most likely they're all public, but you might have added internal staff users as staff. And I know that Spokane does that. So that's, and I mentioned all that just to make sure that it's clear what the user record type does. This job is only going to purge the patrons of the type that you select here. So if you select all, then the records of any user record type will be deleted. If we set it to public, that's generally going, that's going to delete anybody that's set to public, and I know that includes all the external users. So my philosophy on this job is to not open the delete job up too much. You want to keep it narrow and make sure you only delete the ones you intend to delete. So I'd recommend setting user record type to public. Then the user group, this will allow you to determine which type, focus the delete a little more narrowly, so you can delete students, and your user groups will depend on how you have those. What appears in your pop down will depend on what you have set up in your library. So you'll have different names for your groups, but maybe and it makes sense to do it by user group, because you might want to delete students every 6 months and staff every year or something. So you would select a user group, and then the wave threshold is the amount up to which fines will be forgiven so that the user record can be deleted. If you don't set anything here, then users who owe anything, even 10 cents, won't be deleted even if they match the criteria of the job. So if you want to set the wave threshold to $5, you would set that to 5. And run the job, and then those users would be deleted. And I'll set, again, this is a sandbox. I don't know if there are any. Let's try. Oh, let me set it to what's 2 years. Maybe there's something. I just want to see if there's any. So you run the job. So it looks like I did delete some user records. So failed to waive 3 fines, successfully deleted 13, missed 1. User delete validation failed. Let's see what that means. User active fee is greater than the threshold. So you can see that there were users that met the criteria. Purge date was more than 2 years in the past. They owed more than $5. And then, here's an interesting one. User is a requester of purchase request and cannot be deleted. So if there are miscellaneous open transactions on the patron record, they won't those also won't be deleted. And in your purge job, then you can see you can review those users based on the user ID. I see Ellen says, is there a recommended threshold for fines? What are folks who purged prior to CTC Link using for that threshold? I'll open that question up. That's very much an institutional decision. So I'll let you guys speak up on that.
At Seattle, just for right now, we're not purging patron records that have fines associated with them. One of the things that I wish the patron purge job had that, sorry, but that it doesn't. I wish it would allow you to say, not just we'll waive fines above a certain threshold, but I wish it would let us waive specific fines.
Oh, fine
It
type.
would be really nice if it would say, if it would let us waive any overdue fines, but keep any replacement costs. But it doesn't do that. So yeah, so we're just we're choosing to not purge patron records that have associated fines, fees, replacement costs, and we're just dealing with those manually. But if you knew for a fact that all of your replacement costs were above a certain amount, you might be able to set the waive threshold below that.
Well, I'm curious, can you talk about the more specifically what would if well, I'm trying to understand why not if the dollar amount is $5, what does it really matter if it's fee or replacement
So
cost?
with our auditors and with our business offices,
Uh-huh.
and this is one of those things that we're hearing different things from different business offices within our institution, right?
Yeah.
So we've got one business office that will say, under no circumstances can you ever waive any replacement cost, because that is somebody who took state property. And they took state property, and so they owe the state that money no matter what. And you can never ever remove that from their record. And then we have another business office that says, if you have a procedure in place to show that you made a good faith effort to get the material back and to collect the money, but you just weren't able to, then yes, you can go ahead and waive it. So that's where that distinction comes in. Overdue fines are very definitely under the purview of the library, and the library can set their own policies about when they want to forgive overdue fines and when they don't. But once we get into the replacement costs, then we're dealing with the business office and the auditors and the question of state property.
Yeah, and well, that makes sense, Kirstine. Another scenario that might apply here is that for whatever reason, there's some kind of there are for various workflow reasons, maybe there are some inflated overdue amounts owed by patrons in there that aren't related to a lost item, but just because the check-in failed or something, they have $100 overdue fine. But if there's not a lost item attached to that, it's kind of ephemeral. The thing that I'm assuming the thing came back, but somehow something a glitchy transaction resulted in a high dollar value on an overdue that would be a scenario whereas the replacement cost is something real happened. You didn't get something back that
well, and we know from when we were on Voyager that there was like this huge period of time where we didn't have Voyager configured correctly. And so people would bring back stuff that had gone into lost status. Right. And it would be checked in, but the lost item replacement fee would not get automatically waived in the system, and it would stay attached to their patron record. So we know for a fact that we also have some lost item replacement fees from Voyager that really shouldn't have been there.
Well, there actually is I agree that and that would actually be a good idea exchange. It may already be out there because that seems like a good idea, allowing you to waive based on the type of fine. But there is a way to there's kind of a little trick you can use with a patron purge to target something like that, and that is, and I believe a couple of our institutions have done this, and I know it's a common practice at other Alma institutions, which is to have a user group like, delete users user group, and then move users you want to delete into that group before you delete them. So what that would look like, say in Kirsty's case, is identifying users with just overdue fines and not lost fines, creating a, you could do that in analytics, maybe I mean, some, you might be able to use advanced search to do some things, but let's see. Yeah, I guess this is, there's not really in here transaction info. So you'd have to address that, Kirsty, in you'd have to identify those users in analytics and then create a set from that and then put them in a user group. And that's kind of,
yeah, but yeah, that's a really good idea of having a user group that you use for patrons that you've identified as needing to be deleted.
Yeah, because once you have, and the way that would let's assume you've already created the set of users that you want to remove, and that go across user groups, but you want to delete them. You can, once they're in a set, you can use the update users job. And then update their user group to a group you've created called delete these users or whatever. Set their group there. You can even, and whether or not you're changing the user group, if you're, and this is actually an answer for a question Melinda asked. You can update the purge date for a set of users in this job as well. So if you have purge dates that are too far out and you want to delete those users, you can first set the purge date back to a date where you can delete them. Let's say that the purge date is currently a year out for some patrons you want to remove. You need to get the purge date into the past before you can target those users in the patron purge job. So you can set that date back here and then run the job, and then run this job to update those users, and then those users will be targetable in the purge user records job.
Can you set the purge date in the past? I know with expiration dates, you can't ever set them in a date in the past. I can't remember if that applies to purge dates.
Oh, well, I don't remember. Let's edit my record real quick and see if I can. Oh, I guess I can't. You're right. Yeah, I can only set, so you'd have to set it to current date, and then I could purge the records the next day. And I don't know if you can see that, but the dates in the past are grayed out here, so it's not letting me select anything in the past. You're right, Kirsten. And then, creating the user group is just a user admin management thing. Where it is. User groups. You would just add a user group. Delete users. Delete these users. I don't want that. So then I could, that's the group that I could move users to that I want to then purge. And that's, you know, again, that's a case, that's a way to target users for deletion that this job isn't set up to target. So you can create the, and if you create a new group, it may not show up until the next day in this pop down list or until I log out and log back in. So that's fabulous board of trustees. That's a good user group. So and then, you know, yeah, the and they're the patron life cycle is something to consider, and it's more of a policy discussion. I think a few of you have come around to the idea that you can purge users from Alma more frequently than you might have done in the past, or in other systems in the past might have done. It's a matter of considering what you need the user records in Alma for once the patron is gone from the institution. Either they're no longer registered or they're no longer employed. You know, what is actually in the Alma record that is worth keeping is basically the way to think about that. And that's why it's, again, I mentioned that's a better way maybe to think about what I was trying to say earlier about being more careful with how you purge, with it, being thoughtful about your internal user records relative to the patron purge, because there are you know, internal user records are going to be more difficult to recover if you delete them without really wanting to. The thing about the student and employee records is that, I mean, we could delete all of your current student. We could go into Seattle's, you know, Alma right now, purge all current students. It wouldn't, the purge job does not delete anybody that has open transactions of any kind. As we saw when the example I tried to run did not delete somebody with an open purchase request. So Alma is already checking for that. If I deleted a set of students today with a purge job that I actually didn't want to, those students would just get loaded again tonight or early tomorrow morning from the campus system if they are current students. You know, and if they're not enrolled students, you know, why do they need a record in Alma? That's one way, maybe one way to think about it. They need a record in Alma if they still owe you a bunch of money, or not if you want to have a ready way in Alma to look at student contact information for students who say were registered within the last 6 months. That might be kind of a use case for not deleting records out of Alma immediately after the student is no longer a registered at the institution, or if an employee is not employed, you know, any longer employed at the institution. I mean, that's really the thing to think about in terms of deciding how often to purge, or the inverse of that, how long to keep user records before you remove them from Alma. because again, any active students, any current employees are going to be in the campus system. So that's really kind of the user information of record at an institutional level. It's not the stuff in Alma. The Alma records are really just copies of your institutional records that allow you to transact with those users. And because Alma can't, it would be, in an ideal world, the user records wouldn't even exist in Alma. They would just, you would just transact directly against the records in PeopleSoft, but that would be called having a library module in PeopleSoft, really. So that's, but it's just another way of thinking about user records in Alma versus campus user records. And another, just another way to think about that is really if it were theoretically possible to know which students are going to never check out something from the library, you wouldn't even need their records in Alma, right? They would, because generally authentication for electronic resource access through Primo is not against Alma, it's against your campus system. So they don't need a record in Alma for that. So, if there were any way to know which students were never going to check anything out, they don't need records in Alma. Yeah, and we talked about the amount of forgiveness, Ellen asked about that question. And so what, Kirsty, did you say a dollar amount?
Yeah, so we're not using any dollar amount as a wave threshold for patron
Oh,
purge.
right, yeah. Right. What would you
Because we can't make the distinction between the something that's an overdue fine and something that's a lost item replacement cost.
Yeah. What would you use did you guys talk about that?
Shoot, I think most of the libraries had gotten to the point where overdue fines that have existed for more than a certain period of time will just waive. And we've stopped charging overdue fines on most stuff at this point.
Yeah. Good point.
I think there is some kind of official we'll waive stuff under this amount manually, but I don't remember what it is.
Yeah, and good point. A lot of you do not charge fines. So if you don't, then any amount anyone owes is generally going to be for lost items, right? So that's one way to address what kind of the issue that Kirsty pointed out, is that once you stop charging fines, then there's never going to be anything to forgive for overdues. It's just going to be if you didn't bring back a laptop or a reserved textbook or whatever those things are. Then it would be and to get to the point where you don't have users with legacy overdue fines, you can use the custom group trick. You would have to, I think, use analytics to identify who owes overdue fines, and then you could go into those records and zero those fines out. I don't know how much that would be worth doing, or maybe it's just identifying those users, putting them in the custom group, and then running the purge patron job against that. I don't know if there's any way to create a set of users in Alma for that without going into analytics. I can create sets of transactions. I can create a report of fines and fees, but I can't identify users in, I don't think I can identify users in Alma that have overdue fines without, oh, I can identify those that owe something, but I can't identify what those fines are. The user record doesn't carry, the user record, I guess, the user record only carries a total amount the patron might owe. It doesn't carry the specific transactional info about fines and fees. Those live in a different place in Alma, so they're just linked to the user record, but we can't search for those in Alma. That's what we'd have to do in analytics. Anybody, any other input about a specific amount that you use for patron purges, or that you would use if you were to run the job? I think now that the more I think about it, I think Kirsten's point is a good one about overdues versus lost items. For that reason, I might tend to keep. It seems like the $5 to $10 range would be appropriate.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
And another, another way another way that you could think about it is to first go in and use analytics to look at what the universe of data you have looks like. So, and we don't have analytics in the sandbox. It doesn't have, so it would be, and I don't want to pull up fine and fee info in anybody's production environment, but you could go into analytics and just, create a list of all of your fines and fees just to see kind of how much and at what amounts those exist at. So, if you only have a few that are over $10, then you could look at those separately or something. But it might be worth considering what the data is before making a decision on that stuff. And then I guess why, there's no technical cost to not running patron purge. Until and unless disk space, storage space gets too expensive for Xlevers to just keep adding it. And honestly, these records are not very large, so I don't see that happening in the near future, that a call for Xlevers that you cannot, you're exceeding, data storage limits within Alma. I don't see that happening. So what's the benefit of doing patron purge? The biggest one I would say is just security and privacy of past students and employees. And Alma is just another place for data about people to live. And so if you don't need that data, why keep it around? Because it's just another way that somebody might get to personal info, and not, not that the Alma shouldn't have anything like social security number, anything, but there's email addresses, phone numbers, street addresses, all that stuff. So that's the biggest reason. A smaller reason is just to reduce the visual pollution in Alma of when you're dealing with user records. When you have, I just noticed Kirsty said there were 600,000 records in Voyager before they ran a purge. There's going to be a heck of a lot of Smiths and 600,000 records. So if you want to use Alma to look up somebody whose last name is Smith, you're going to get quite a number of records to look through, relative to what you'd see if you whittle that down to just the most recent years records of relevance, which is probably more like 15,000 at Seattle College. Ellen asked about the purging old records caused issues with CTC link. Here's the thing about that. The kind of the connection there is that in CTC link, there's going to be a change in employee IDs and student IDs, right? So, and I do have a process for updating the user IDs in Alma based on the crosswalk that I get from the institutions. But reducing the number of records in Alma prior to doing that just reduces the risk of error in doing that crosswalk. And so there is a functional benefit to doing the patron purge prior to CCC link crosswalking, and it is just to reduce errors, and it's also to reduce risk of duplicate records in Alma. Let's say, I think there are a couple of different scenarios where that can happen. You could have an older user with an ID number that has changed, so you may have, let's say you have a student named James Smith. They may have, let's say, especially in a case where you have very old patron records. Jane Smith might have registered a couple of different times at your institution, and each time she might have gotten a different student ID number. So it's possible that you have user records in your system now that are duplicates, that one's long expired that has an older ID number, and then the person re-registered, a couple of years later, they were issued a new ID number, or they had a name change or something, and that triggered a new ID number. And so now when that might trigger errors in the crosswalk process, and it also you'll continue to have those duplicates will live on post CTC link. So that's kind of the functional reason why I would like to see stale user records purged from all instances before that crosswalk happens.
So Wade, here's another question. Here's a situation that we have at Skagit where we have emeritus faculty, folks who've retired, and their records, and I haven't checked all of them, but from a couple that I've spot checked, it looks like their records remained as, like, they never got toggled to internal, they were external. And however, these faculty will sometimes come back and they will teach part-time. So that might be, I could see a situation where we would end up with duplicates if they come back as part-timers and are now assigned a new ID number, because even though we've changed their status from employee to emeritus borrower, we've kept the primary ID, which was their employee ID number. So that sounds like a situation that could lend itself to duplication.
Yeah, let's see, and it,
Sorry, Kirsty. We
yeah,
are the
yeah,
cautionary
that's
tale, it's
yeah,
gadget.
yeah, that's a tricky one. It kind of depends on what happens. You know, if the emeritus, you know, if this person, if their old ID number continues to live on the campus system, so that they are issued a new ID number to replace their old one, and that comes in through the crosswalk, then when we crosswalk and overlay the new IDs into Alma, you'd have the desired outcome. They would just get their new ID number assigned in the
Okay, so the crosswalk should work to prevent that scenario, right?
well, if you leave that user as external, and if the institution does indeed issue that person a new ID number based on their old ID number. And the reason why I say it, if you leave that user as external, because the the nightly imports will not overlay internal records. So that's a way you can end up with duplicates regardless, is if somebody is marked as internal and they're also, they come in
Worth a shot.
external. I guess thinking out loud.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what to do to prevent
Yeah.
that scenario, and maybe I should just make sure that they are all external.
The best outcome would be to leave them as external, leave their just leave their old ID as their primary ID, don't mess with anything, and then when the crosswalk happens,
Okay, that
the
makes
ID
sense.
number may get overlaid with a new one, and if it doesn't, that means that if they end up in the campus system again as a part-time employee, say they would just get a duplicate record in Alma.
Cool.
Yeah, and you
But,
might just need to, Elena, you might just need to maintain an outside list of, here's the faculty and staff emeritus, and you occasionally go through and check.
Yeah, I think that might be a really good idea, because like I noticed you mentioned that they would be tagged as emeritus. Well, our HR department, like we're not there yet. So
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, we aren't either.
yeah,
Well, and
yeah.
one of the other things that we've run into is the written policy says that faculty and staff emeritus get library borrowing privileges for the rest of their lives, but they only have an institutional email account for 2 years. And with the way that Alma and Primo works, we're not really set up to let them have, like, they won't have access to anything, any of our electronic resources. They can't even at this point place holds to pick stuff up if they don't have that,
If they don't have the
institutional
email.
email address.
So you might need to contact them individually, and what a pain in the butt that will be, and
Yeah,
have them
yeah.
submit personal emails.
Well, and I think what I brought this up to Kurt, and luckily my boss is a vice chancellor, and I think they're going to have to revisit the faculty emeritus policy to grant them institutional email addresses for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, that's actually super good, because I know our HR department is doing their emeritus policy right now, and it's just been ongoing, like literally for years. So we've been negotiating with this.
Oh my gosh.
It's been a nightmare. And so and they've been shorthanded and they haven't been able to get to it, but that's something that we'll push for, is to make sure that they get the email permanently. So anyway, thanks everybody. I'm sorry, I kind of hijacked that at the end, but I do need to head out now, but thanks very much. This was super helpful.
Yeah, that was a good discussion, Alma. That was actually a useful question. And yeah, that's good. That's a tricky one. All right. All right. Well, I hope that was I hope in general that was helped some folks understand the patron purge a bit more. Let me know if not. We're at the hour and I see people are dropping off the call, so I'll go ahead and stop sharing and stop recording now.